So I'll just do 29 by myself, and we can, as a group, do 30. You'll have to forgive me today. I'm kind of a little something or another. I don't know what it is. My nose is dreeping, as they say. Oh. Can someone push down on the handle of the camera so the front? Yeah. Right there. Great. Thanks. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janabalabha Giri Bharadari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Banachari Jairan Hamadhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Paramahansa Darasata Shri Śrimad, Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki, Granthred Śrimad Bhāgavatam Ki, Samveda Bhaktivedanta Ki, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to Samveda. All glories to Samveda. All glories to Samveda. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupaka Damayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Mitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Okay, then welcome. Today we are on Śrimad Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 21, Text 29 and 30. And 29 has no purport, so I'll just read it solo, both the Sanskrit and the English, and then we will responsively do number 30. Yatad atma britam viryam navadha prasavishyati viryetva diye rishaya adhasyanti anjasatmanaha. Yatad atma britam viryam navadha prasavishyati viryetva diye rishaya adhasyanti anjasatmanaha. Here is the translation of this verse, 3.21.29. She will bring forth 9 daughters from the seed sown in her by you, and through the daughters you beget, the sages will duly beget children. All right, so now we'll move on to the verse for today. Tvam cha samyak anushtaya. Tvam cha samyak anushtaya. Nirdesham ma usattamaha. Nirdesham ma usattamaha. Maitirthi kritasesha. Maitirthi kritasesha. Kriyarto mam prapatsyase. Kriyarto mam prapatsyase. Tvam cha samyak anushtaya. Nirdesham ma ushattamaha. My tirti kritashesha. Kriyarto mam prapatsyase. Anyone else? Hom cha samyag anushtaya. Nirdesham ma ushattamaha. My tirti kritasesha. Kriyarto mam prapatsyase. Tvam samyak anushtaya. Nirdesham ma ushattamaha. My tirti kritasesha. Kriharto mam prapatsyase. Tvam cha samyak anushtaya. Nirdesham ma ushattamaha. My tirti kritasesha. Kriharto mam prapatsyase. Vaishnavis. Tvam cha samyak anushtaya. Nirdesham ma ushattamaha. My tirti kritasesha. Kriyarto mam prapatsyase. Tamam samyak anushtaya. Nirdesham ma usattamaha. My tirti kritasesha. Kriyarto mam prapatsyase. Tvam, you, cha, and, samyak, properly, anushtaya, having carried out, nirdesham, command, may, my, usattamaha, completely cleansed, mai, unto me, tirti krita, having resigned, asesha, all, kriya, of actions, artaha, the fruits, mam, to me, prapatsyase, you will attain. So here is the English translation. With your heart cleansed by properly carrying out my command, resigning to me the fruits of all your acts, you will finally attain to me. So we'll do this responsibly, I say, and you please repeat. With your heart cleansed by properly carrying out my command, resigning to me the fruits of all your acts, you will finally attain to me. Okay, here's Prabhupada's purport. Here, the words tirti kritasesha, kriyartaha are significant. Tirtha means a sanctified place where charity is given. People used to go to places of pilgrimage and give munificently in charity. This system is still current. Therefore, the Lord says, in order to sanctify your activities and the results of your actions, you will offer everything unto me. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you sacrifice, and the result should be given to me only. In another place in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, I am the enjoyer of all sacrifices, all penances, and everything done for the welfare of mankind or society. All activities, therefore, whether for the welfare of family, society, country, or humanity at large, must be performed in Krishna consciousness. That is the instruction given by the Lord to Karna Muni. Maharaj Yudhishthir welcomed Narada Muni. Whenever you are present, that place becomes sanctified because the Lord himself is always seated in your heart. Similarly, if we act in Krishna consciousness under the direction of the Lord and his representative, then everything is sanctified. This is the indication given to Karna Muni, who acted on it and therefore received the most excellent wife and child, as will be disclosed in later verses. Tvam cha samyag anushtaya nirdesham ma ushattamaha maitirti kritasesha kriyarto mam prapatsyase. With your heart cleansed by properly carrying out my command, resigning to me the fruits of all your acts, you will finally attain to me. We're off to a rocky start here. So, the section here of the 21st chapter of 3rd canto, we discover the Supreme Lord is speaking to Karna Muni. And so therefore, Karna Muni is hearing. He's been offering prayers to the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord appeared, and the Supreme Lord is very pleased with him. Karna Muni had intended to ask for a wife, but the Supreme Lord was way ahead of him, which is the way it always is. Supreme Lord already knew that that's what he was asking for, and therefore he said that he'd already arranged it, and it would just be a matter of a few days before Swayambhuva Manu would come and visit Karna Muni and deliver his daughter Devahuti to Karna Muni. It's interesting that reading some of the explanations by Burijan in surrendering to his lotus feet, or unveiling his lotus feet, that's what the Bhāgavatam commentary that he has is called. He describes that Karna Muni has been kind of thus far described as having somewhat of a material mentality, that he had wanted to become married. But actually, this was not so much because Karna Muni was desirous of entering Grihastha life and wanted to enjoy the way a Grihastha enjoyed. In the purports, we have that Jiva Goswami in his Bhakti Sandarbha describes that actually Karna Muni wanted to have a wife and to have children because, wait for it, Brahma wanted to have children produced to populate the universe. So Karna Muni was really trying to align himself with the desire of Lord Brahma. So that was his primary motivation for wanting to become married. And we have discussed some of these different things. And there's a lot of interesting themes here. Mostly, a lot of these themes are about Grihastha life, married life, and how the brahmachari is connected with the brahmacharini, or somehow or other they're united, and then they become married, and in the process they take vows. The whole process of Grihastha ashram or Grihastha life is commitment to vows, not commitment to sense gratification. So, this is one of the main themes, that if there's a commitment to sense gratification, then the marriage will just poop out very soon, because whenever things are based on sense gratification, the stock market of sense gratification is always changing. One day it's up, one day it's down. And when the stock market of sense gratification is down, there appears to be no reason to continue the relationship. And this is why in our modern world, people come together and then they break up after some period of time. Sometimes they bother to go through the rituals of marriage, and sometimes they don't even bother to do that. They just live together for a time and then they separate, having found that they are no longer feeling it, no longer feeling the desire for material gratification from the other person, wanting to look for some greener pasture, some fresher situation. This is unfortunate because in our modern world, we don't really have monogamy. What we have is what they usually call serial monogamy, which is people have one husband or one wife at a time. But in the course of time, they may course through several as they evolve. And in this way, they get a chance to experience all these different things. Of course, this creates a lot of sociological and emotional, what's a good word for it? Baggage and, various kinds of, we could even say trauma, that because we come together in relationships and we break up, and then another relationship, we break up. There are children, there's sometimes alimony, there are children having visitation rights with one spouse and the other spouse. There are court proceedings, all these kinds of things create an enormous amount of turbulence in people's lives. And as a matter of fact, because this is so turbulent, people really don't have a clear head to try to engage in spiritual life. And I wanted to reiterate what our Prana Govinda said yesterday, because I think it bears repeating. I thought it was really nicely worded. I'll word it a little bit differently. That either you have good marriage karma or you don't. Hate to break it to you, but that's the way the material world works. If you do, then things will kind of work out. If you don't, things will not work out, and there's basically nothing you can do about it except for Boo-hoo-hoo. And so that is what's actually happening. And it may not actually be just based on karma. It might not have been that you created some devastating effect on someone in a previous life or something like that. It may just be that the Supreme Lord thinks, I don't want this devotee to get tangled up in married life. I'm going to give them the most whirlwind, wild weasel ride that they can possibly get by connecting with someone of the opposite sex. And this will kind of burn them out on it, and they will be happy just being solo after a time. So it's not our call, it's not my call, it's the Supreme Lord's call. And this is the way we have to kind of get used to the fact that there are many things in our lives that are completely out of our control. And the point that I try to make quite often is that the more specific you are about what desires you want fulfilled in exactly what way, the less likely things are to actually pan out that way. So if you want to meet a tall, dark, handsome stranger and live in the Caribbean, the more details there are, then the less likely it is to actually occur. Instead, what will happen is that there'll be something that doesn't line up. So you might as well not make very detailed plans, because most likely they won't line up. And people who have somehow managed to just think, well, as long as I'm alive and I'm performing service, and we see in the Vedic literatures it says that just as suffering comes unbeckoned and unheralded, so similarly happiness does as well. That we sometimes find ourselves very happy at no particular reason, just the same way sometimes we find ourselves very wretchedly miserable for essentially no particular reason. So sometimes happiness comes, sometimes sorrow comes. So therefore, the Vedas keep trying to remind us that don't work very hard for material happiness, because you're going to get some anyways. And it's going to come in some form that may not be the exact item that you had on your Christmas list. So we have these little things in the back of our mind, the way that we wish it would all work out. And sometimes it works out that way, and sometimes not. For Kardamuni, it worked out that way. We're hearing again and again that if a devotee is serving the Supreme Lord, the devotee will never be frustrated. But here's, as I think, the fine print. The devotee will never be frustrated. We don't really want a specific marriage partner in a specific situation with a specific type of character. What we want is happiness. And happiness is very generic. So when a person gets the actual happiness of connecting with the Supreme Lord, it's like all your $5 bills are paid, all your menial specific desires, your strange, way off the beaten track special requests are all fulfilled. Because actually that's all we really want, is to be happy. And if we engage in Krishna consciousness, then eventually we will stop trying to calculate and plan for happiness. We will just realize that some stuff is going to hit us, and some of it's probably going to be good, and some of it's maybe not so stellar, maybe not so what's the word they use all the time? So copacetic. So instead we just take what comes, and eventually we stop keeping score. And at that point, we become very satisfied. And this is what Krishna is describing in the Bhagavad Gita. We hear Krishna describing this kind of an attitude in several places in Bhagavad Gita. Now, as I was saying, we might or might not have good karma to have a good spouse. And for that matter, we might or might not have the karma to be married at all. So, for what it's worth, it ain't half bad. And I always think that this was definitely Krishna's benediction on the women of the world to inspire me to not want to become involved so that they wouldn't have to suffer with someone like me, you know. So I think in this way that, this is kind of the way it works. I thought of a story. I don't know why I remember these things sometimes. I must have been 4 or 5 years old. Must have been something like 4 or 5 years old. My family had just moved from New York City to Sedalia, Missouri. My father had gotten a job with the United States Department of Agriculture, and we got located to Sedalia, Missouri. And so we got on an airplane, and we came out in Missouri, and I was a little kid, so suddenly it's a completely new environment. But here we're in this huge house, and before we were in this little thing in what's now Spanish Harlem. That's where we lived before before we left New York City. And next door, there was a family, and they had, I think, about 4 or 5 girls. And they had some friends, and they were girls too. So there's this huge gang of girls. And I was the only boy. So we were playing together, and they decided that they were going to do a dress-up. So what they did was they put me in a bathrobe or something like that, and they did this marriage ceremony. And so this little girl was there, and, I was there. I didn't know what was going on. I kind of basically knew these things, and I felt very, very apprehensive about the whole thing. I felt kind of very, sort of fearful. And worse than that, they took pictures of it all, and they gave those pictures to my parents. So then I was eating dinner, and my father told me, well, now you're married. And I said, no, it was just play. He goes, no, you're really And I couldn't sleep for a while. I was really terrified. I thought, I have destroyed my life now, how older people sometimes play with children's minds this way. And I think I don't hold any grudges because, children play with adults' minds. So it's only fitting that adults get the chance to return the favor every once in a while. So like Prabhupada having somebody tell him that the watermelon seed he swallowed would become a watermelon in his stomach. And, so these are the kind of things that adults sometimes tell children just to play with their minds. And so you can see this is why these kind of childhood traumas, kind of maybe set the stage for a person to become a sannyasi later on. At any rate, the interesting thing that Prabhupada puts forward, and Burijan mentions this because he jumps around a little bit. Right now, we're hearing about Kardama Muni listening to the Supreme Lord, and the Supreme Lord will tell him that soon Swayambhuva Manu is coming, going to deliver his daughter. Then Supreme Lord will leave. Swayambhuva Manu will actually come. And Shatarupa, his wife, will be there. They'll deliver their daughter, Devahuti, who has been only thinking about Kardama Muni ever since she heard about him. So she heard about him, she was attracted. Without, needing to know what he looked like, she was just attracted by his qualities and some other things. So she was fixed on him, and therefore the marriage was arranged. And then we find that Devahuti serves Kardama Muni as a menial servant for many years. She's serving him very faithfully. She is, not taking care of even her own body. She's just doing whatever austerities he does because she's trying to live a life that he's living. And therefore, she becomes very powerful and austere. But she also becomes kind of not so nice looking after time as a result of years going by of not attending to her own personal body. And then we find in a chapter coming up later on that Devahuti comes to Karna Muni and says, "My dear Karna Muni, we have been together for a long time. And as you know, I really would like to have children. Can you fulfill my desire?" And Karna Muni says, "Certainly, that you've been such a faithful wife that we shall certainly arrange it." And then she kind of becomes very bashful, and Karna Muni understands what's going on, that she feels not very attractive as a result of all these years of austerity. So Karna Muni creates first an aerial starship, or an aerial, not starship, aerial spaceship, aerial spaceship. And the aerial spaceship can move according to his desires. And we find out that it was 7 stories. And that it had like palatial rooms and all kinds of accoutrements and artwork, and it was very attractive and opulent, and its opulence tended to increase on its own just day by day. But he tells Devahuti that you should take bath in Bindu Sarovar. And as we know, Bindu Sarovar was the lake where the Supreme Lord originally met Karna Muni and shed tears because of Karna Muni's austerities that he had performed. So Devahuti goes into the lake, and immediately 1,000 celestial ladies attend to her. And they give her new clothes. They tend to her body, they comb her hair, they perform all these kinds of activities to make her once again the attractive princess that she actually was as a result of her birth in the family of Swayambhuva Manu. So then after that happens, then Karna Muni and Devahuti, they travel for many years in this aerial airship. They travel all over different places of the universe, and they enjoy. And after some time, it says that 100 autumns went by, and then Karna Muni said, "Well, it's time for me to renounce." And Devahuti says, "Well, what about me?" And then Karna Muni divides himself into 9 forms. And Karna Muni impregnates Devahuti, and she gives birth to 9 daughters, and these daughters will be given to the 9 sages, and then Devahuti says, "Well, you are leaving, but your daughters will eventually find husbands and leave home, so what will happen to me?" And Karna Muni tells Devahuti, "Don't worry, that you have been so purified that the Supreme Lord will soon take birth in your womb." So he explains to his wife that soon Kapila Dev will be her child, and Kapila Dev will come from her womb, and then he will explain to her the Sankhya philosophy. So that's what's in the future. But I thought an interesting thing that was part, and this is in third canto, where we are now, but not this chapter, the 24th chapter, instead of the 21st chapter. And verse 15. This is a continuation of this saga about Swayambhuva Manu gifting his daughter, Devahuti. So here's the verse. Therefore today please give away your daughters to the foremost of the sages with due regard for the girls' temperaments and likings, and thereby spread your fame all over the universe. Now, these two words, Prabhupada focuses on them, according to temperament and taste. And in Sanskrit is yata shilam and yata ruchi, according to temperament and taste. So I'll read the purport. The 9 principal rishis or sages are Marichi, Atri, Angira, Pulastya, Pulaha, Kratu, Bhrigu, Vashishta, and Artava. All these rishis are the most important, and Brahma desired that the 9 daughters already born of Karda Muni be handed over to them. Here 2 words are used very significantly, yata shilam and yata ruchi. The daughters should be handed over to respective rishis, but not blindly, but according to the combination of character and taste. So these are the 2 words used here, character and taste. This is the art of combining a man and a woman. Man and woman should not be united simply on consideration of sex life. There are many other considerations, especially character and taste. So ruchi and shila. If the taste and character differ between the man and woman, their combination will be unhappy. Even about 40 years ago in Indian marriages, the taste and character of the boy and girl were first of all matched. And then they were allowed to marry. This was done under the direction of the respective parents. The parents used to astrologically determine the character and tastes of the boy and girl. And when they corresponded, the match was selected. The girl and the boy are just suitable and they should be married. Other considerations were less important. The same system was also advised in the beginning of creation by Brahma. Your daughter should be handed over to the rishis according to taste and character. According to astrological calculation, a person is classified according to whether he belongs to godly or demoniac qualities. In that way, the spouse was selected. A girl of godly quality would be handed over to a boy of godly quality, and a girl of demoniac quality would be handed over to a boy of demoniac quality. And then they will be happy. But if the girl is demoniac and the boy godly, then the combination is incompatible. They cannot be happy in a marriage. At the present moment, because boys and girls are not married according to quality and character, most marriages are unhappy and there is divorce. So, and then Prabhupada talks about how in the 12th canto of Śrimad Bhāgavatam we find that in Kali Yuga, as Kali Yuga progresses, that all good qualities are completely ruined and people get married only on the basis of sex attraction. And once there's sex attraction, then there's marriage, or at least cohabitation. And then when the sex attraction fades, then there's breakup. So I don't know much more about what Prabhupada actually means by ruchi and shila, but we see that this is kind of the essence of it, that if the two are not matched in their commitment to spiritual life, then certainly that will be a difficult marriage to broker. However, if they are matched, either neither of them is interested in spiritual life, or both of them are interested in spiritual life, then that will be much more nice. So the other theme that I thought in this section that we have been discussing is that Karna Muni kind of leaves it up to the Supreme Lord. So there's only so much you can do to try to comb through this great material world to find a suitable partner. Only so much you can do. We are finite, tiny. What do we really know about other people? How can we evaluate it? As Prabhupada says, that generally when a boy considers a girl or a girl considers a boy, they consider mostly whether they're romantically attracted to the features of the other person. And they don't consider whether they are actually emotionally or spiritually committed on the same level, and therefore that aspect of the equation is left uncalculated, and as a result, oftentimes things don't work out in the long run. Of course, if people make an effort to seriously engage in spiritual life, then a lot of things can work out. If the real combination of the boy and the girl is to make progress in spiritual life, then a lot of things can be overlooked, and the marriage can go on in spite of all kinds of things that might upset the marriage. And this is actually what's wanted. This is actually the Vedic concept. So Karna Muni simply prayed to the Supreme, and Krishna made the arrangement. And of course, Karna Muni would have been fine if Krishna had not made the arrangement, because that was the way he was thinking, that I'm ashamed that I'm asking you for this material thing. As we said, he was not really so much interested in the pleasures of Grihastha ashram. He was really interested in pursuing the goal that Brahma had set for him, to create progeny. So Brahma has his work cut out for him, and it's no easy task for Brahma. He gets frustrated in so many attempts to create a universe full of people. So many things go wrong. But, all right. And one thing I thought that I would just put in here, because I think it's a very important thing, and since I'm speaking to people and I'm on the internet too, that don't stay in an abusive marriage. If you're in a marriage and there's physical abuse, then there's no reason to continue such a marriage, or at least one has to find some kind of counseling and remove. This is something I think happens all too often. So, yes, we should try to put up with whatever the spouse is doing, and there will be things that, drive us nuthouse with some other person, because whoever you're living with, there's bound to be some things that just really do you wildly crazy, and you just have to learn how to tolerate. And in this way, it will go on. But when things go beyond a certain range, if there's physical abuse, then it's time to seek counseling and maybe break off the relationship. So I just wanted to put that in there too. So, questions or comments I've gotten? Yeah, we get our microphone.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for the class. My question is there any specific reason for the 9 daughters of Kardama to be given to 9 sages? Who, are they not interrupting their sadhana by getting them married or something?
Well, we're still, as you see, we're in the grand plan here. Brahma, takes birth from the lotus flower and Garbhodakshay, Vishnu's navel, and he wonders what he's supposed to do. Then he hears tapa, and then he creates the planetary systems. Then he understands he's supposed to fill the universe with population. That's the next step of the whole process. So he's supposed to fill the universe with population. So he's attempting to do that. And most of these beginning entities in the early part of the universe are all in the category of Prajapatis. That's their business, is to create a universe full of living beings of various types. And so this was the plan, and it looks like they kind of had it figured out beforehand that you have 9 sages, so they had 9 daughters, so it works out, nothing left over, no extras, no doubling up, So, more than that, I don't know. But that's the whole plan. So we've got, Brahma tried to get Narada Muni to do that, and Narada Muni said, And so Brahma became angry, and Lord Shiva was born, and then Brahma tried to get Shiva to create living entities, and Shiva was happy to create living entities, but he created very disturbing living entities, which in the very beginning began to tear apart the universe. So as the universe is not even fully created, there are beings who are tearing it apart. So therefore Brahma says, my dear Shiva, you please just now sit and meditate, and we won't ask you to perform any more Prajapati stuff, please. Thank you very much. I appreciate your effort. So, so this was what happened. And then, of course, we have, other Prajapatis. Brahma creates entities from his body. He's got his mind-born sages. We find out about Daksha and his creating these Shabalashvas and Haryashvas, and then eventually 60 daughters, and then these are given to also sages. And finally, the whole thing gets off and running. We've got the whole universe, and everything is now running the way we know it, that living entities are created through sexual union, and all kinds of creatures of higher and lower species are there, and it's running like clockwork. Yes?
I was wondering, today's text is 3:21:30, 29 and 30.
Yeah.
In 29, it looks like you have a predestined
You have
9
which?
daughters.
You have what?
Predestined, like
Predestined.
Yeah, but then focus is, that marriage should be jatha ruchi dirtha shilam, according to taste and character. So that's going to make destiny. So is it both?
Yeah, it looks like the whole thing kind of was set up. The material universe is capable of kind of chunking out things in a made-to-order, customized way. I think in this case, maybe Brahma thought about it and created it that way, or maybe the Supreme Lord just worked that into the scheme of things, so that when these daughters of Kardama Muni would be born, that they would be the perfect matches for these 9 sages. So it appears like that. There was some kind of predestination or pre-programming of the whole thing in some way or another. But
Because I remember when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came back from East Bengal, Sylhet, and then he found out his wife passed away.
right.
And he was counseling to his mother. And there are 7 verses. One verse it says, Vidhi or Lord Brahma, the moment a child is born in human species, Brahmaji writes what's going to take place in this life is predestined. They don't know, but that's how it will unfold.
Right, right.
So then, not really much one can do. I mean, besides devotional service, really not much. They're like going to suffer, whatever.
No, not exactly. This is what I was talking about with Yugal Kishore the other day. We get into Karma 201, I call it. We have Karma 101, and we have Karma 201, and we have even Karma 301. So Karma 101 is that whatever sin, papa, or whatever pious activities, punya, you've performed, then you will suffer either karma or vikarma as a result of that activity. And that's what we usually tell people. That's our basic Karma 101. However, when a person becomes a devotee, as we talked about the other day, that when a person becomes a devotee, then no longer works exactly that same way. The Supreme Lord takes on that devotee's, he tells that caseworker, that devotee, to go home, and the Supreme Lord manages his case personally, and so the person might get more karma if the Supreme Lord feels that they're dawdling around or something, or less karma. Usually that's the way it works. The Supreme Lord writes off a lot of things. So we're no longer in the, Manusamhita, you did X, now you have to suffer Y, which is all really even tabled and calculated in the Brahma Samhita, what kind of suffering one goes through for particular infractions. But in this case, when the Supreme Lord takes on, someone has pledged to be a devotee, then the Supreme Lord manages his case separately. And so I call that Karma 201, because we hear about this all the time, that it's not like the Supreme Lord allows the devotee suddenly to throw away his glasses and, be able to become 20 years younger or any of these things. It's not like your entire prarabdha karma is immediately expunged. However, because now you're a devotee, a lot of things that would have happened to you and a lot of things that might have been heading your way are now called off. And through the process of devotional service, you are bettering your own karma. However, we still see that sometimes the Supreme Lord wants to accelerate a devotee's progress, and appears that the devotee is being dumped on by the Supreme Lord. That's there as well. And this gets into sometimes what I call Karma 301, where you have devotees who are obviously pure devotees, but they appear to be experiencing karma, like Yudhishthira and the Pandavas. So what did the Yudhishthira and the Pandavas do wrong? Anything. Yudhishthira was the emblem of punya. He was doing everything right. And yet they went through all this difficulty. In fact, I always find this a very comical passage in the Mahabharata, where Yudhishthira has just left the palace after they lost the second gambling match, and he's with the other Pandavas and with his wife Draupadi. And Draupadi is telling Yudhishthira, she goes, Yudhishthira, look at you. You are the emblem of spiritual activity. You are the emblem of good behavior. And yet, you and I, we're sleeping on the cold, dark, damp ground. And Duryodhana, who is offense personified, is living in the palace at Hastinapur. You, my dear husband, are living proof that karma doesn't work. So this is how Draupadi's talking to her husband. And Yudhishthira replies by saying, my dear wife, you are speaking exactly like an atheist. And then Draupadi says, yes, I know. I actually understand, but I am just so frustrated with the turn of events that we were exiled and so on and so forth. So we see this kind of thing. Jesus Christ getting crucified. We see the Pandavas being exiled to the forest. We see Haridas Thakur being beaten in marketplaces. All these things technically should not be happening. Or, for instance, our Parikshit, who is being actually set up to leave his body because he made a small infraction against a yogi by putting a snake around his shoulders. So this is examples of Karma 301, where Krishna wants to have a pastime. And so he arranges something so that the pastime can work. Like, why did Parikshit go through what he went through? Because therefore Bhāgavatam could be spoken. Why did Arjuna forget everything about spiritual life so that Bhagavad Gita could be spoken? Why did the Pandavas go through all this austerity and tribulation? So that people would see that the Pandavas were not just fair weather sailors. They were committed to spiritual life, come hell, high water, or roses and wonderful times. So they were committed in either way. So that's what I call Karma 301. I just use that sort of analogy to separate those, because I think oftentimes some of these things can perplex devotees. Why is it that devotees who appear to be without blemish are suffering? Because it's part of Krishna's pastimes. He wants to accomplish something. And of course, when a person becomes a devotee, his difficulties may increase or decrease. Usually they decrease. If the devotee becomes complacent, then Krishna may turn up the heat, because Krishna's not above that. If you're, dragging your feet, you might get a visit from Krishna's external energy in a very cute and interesting way. So better try to engage in chanting nicely so you don't have to go that route. And sometimes we see that as well, devotees, they take on the sinful actions of others. The spiritual master is said to absorb the karma of disciple at the time of initiation. And therefore, we find that this theme is there in Vedic literature, that the king absorbs 1/6 of the karma of his constituents, of the people in the kingdom, that the demigods get some of the karma of the people who are worshiping them, that in general we find that a person who is in some disreputable occupation, like bearing their body for photography, will get the karma of those people who become lusty as a result, and so on and so forth. So this is the way that a person will absorb the karma of others to some extent. And if we meditate about the ill deeds of others, we will also absorb their karma, which is frightening when you think about it. So that's why we should be very careful. And this is common tendency for human minds, is to orbit what we don't like about other people and what we feel they're doing wrong. Of course, there's no harm in understanding what's right and what's wrong, from understanding, where somebody is over the line, where they're not. That's all fine. But if we repeatedly meditate on people's bad behavior, we will cause that bad behavior to become manifest in our own consciousness. It's the way it works. Therefore, we should very carefully avoid repeatedly thinking about other people's misbehavior.
Good, very good answer.
And also, the other thing works too. If we think about people's good behavior, we pick up the good side. It works the other way too, which is what we should be doing. Yes, Matunga.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I wanted to ask, the scriptures are showing how there is a gradual movement through the ashrams, brahmachari, grihastha, then vanaprastha, and sannyasi. So it's expected that grihastha, after 20 years or so, he takes a vanaprastha and then sannyasi eventually. So there is a gradual evolution. But we also know that on a spiritual platform that might not be the case, meaning that a grihastha, he might be more advanced spiritually than a sannyasi.
Right.
And also, I think Prabhupada said that, if I'm not mistaken, that ultimately in Kali Yuga, if one remains a householder, exemplary householder, and fulfills his spiritual duties, chants, and so forth, that's enough. So it appears that there are different nuances in understanding this principle. If you can explain what is proper, does one has to take sannyas, or he can just remain grihastha, or he has to take vanaprastha? Because in our movement, like for example nowadays, we don't see this much. I mean, there are not so many vanaprasthas, and there are so many grihasthas who are in their 70s, 80s, and apparently they won't move into their ashrams. So
They won't do it?
they won't move into the next ashram.
Well, if the husband and wife are preaching nicely together, Prabhupada said there's no reason for them to go through that whole system of varnaprastha and sannyas. But, that was what you were saying, right, the other day, that tea or me, was Prabhupada said that, when his wife was actually an impediment to spiritual life, he just said, okay, so what would you like? Would you like tea or me? And she said, well, I guess I'll take tea. And Prabhupada said, okay. And so Prabhupada actually left. So he gave her the choice. And that's the way it can happen as well. All right. So did I answer the whole thing, or there was more to what?
So no need to take sannyas, no need to take vanaprastha or sannyas.
Well, not necessarily. Only if there is a sense that you've plateaued, you're not getting any farther. That the husband and wife are just not really preaching together, they're just kind of lost in family stuff. Then there might be a reason to think about vanaprastha and then sannyas. Of course, vanaprastha means that the husband and wife stay together, but they leave the house and they travel to holy places and meditate on the fact that soon they'll be leaving their bodies. That's generally how vanaprastha works. And at one time people went into the forest, but that's not so practical these days. So instead, vanaprastha usually means that they travel to holy places together. And of course, there's no sex life. There's just the visiting of various sacred places, like Prabhupada mentions, tirthas, where a person can perform sacrifice, and purify themselves, and please the Supreme Lord.
So the fundamental principle is devotional service. If the man and woman together, they're doing very nice devotional service,
Right.
then what is the use? But then at the same time, there is understanding that when one takes sannyas, for example, it is for the purpose of expanding his devotional service even more.
Right. Usually, but it may not be so. So again, all these things aren't, I think, cut out boilerplates. That there is some time, place, and circumstance according to the individual involved. So, at any rate, we're getting late here, and I thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Śrimad Bhāgavatam. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna. I'm doing my timing clap so that I can sync all these recording devices.